Neon lights flicker in Soho. It's the dawning days of the 80s, and the music world is caught between the polished flash of disco and the raw crunch of punk. Amid the grit and the glam, a funeral bell tolls, echoing in the black night. The 70s died and took a good friend with them, burning rubber on the highway down under. But there's more exits up ahead. More souls to sell, more thrills to shoot, more legs to shake. So shock the blues with lightning that could wake the dead, and rise from the ashes with a bone-rattling roar. Let the guitar riffs crackle, and the voices howl. Let the bass line stomp and carve beats out of the bedrock, and run headfirst into a wall of sound and take the world by storm. The devil is in the details, so keep it simple. Rock and roll ain't noise pollution, and it ain't never gonna die.
Every time I hear keep it simple, I think to myself, keep it simple, stupid. Kiss.
Me too. I almost wrote that. If we were doing a Kiss album, maybe we could.
That would be perfect.
We could work that in.
Hi, I'm Julia.
And I'm Isaac.
We are friends, amateur musicians, and music lovers who believe that full albums are an art form all their own, greater than the sum of their parts.
And this is For the Record, a podcast where we turn off shuffle, ditch the algorithm, and listen to one great album from start to finish.
Today, we're talking about AC/DC's 1980 album, Back in Black. We'll break down the key themes, musical elements, history and context, and discuss how the album holds up today. Hey, Isaac, you ready to talk about Back in Black?
Yes, let's get Back in Black.
First of all, I need you to step closer to the mic.
Yeah, sorry. I just knew that I was going to speak really excitedly in that first moment. I didn't want to blow it out, but...
Good call. Good call. If you're feeling excited, just take a step back,
yeah,
you know?
Yeah, a step back in Black.
Back in Black, this album, wow. Just wow.
It's electric. The energy just like reverberating off of all of these songs is so incredible. I mean, it was huge in its day. It's still big. Like its legacy today is as great as ever. And it's just fun and raw and easy. Pure
rock and roll, baby.
Pure rock and roll.
Well, I think what's funny is I love AC/DC. They've always been one of my favorite rock bands. I don't know that I was ever paying so much attention. Like, I just didn't realize at what point the lineup changes and which albums came first. I just knew that I liked them. I wouldn't say this is my favorite of their albums. I have always liked this album. I don't know that I listened to it as closely as I did for this episode, and so some interesting things came up for me, but so happy to get into it. And also just I love them, so it was a great listen.
Yeah, I'm so with you. I just what you're saying reminded me of a quote I read while I was doing some research from a journalist, Joe Harrington, who said that to this day, producers still use Back in Black as the de facto paint-by-numbers guidebook for how a hard rock record should sound. And I think that kind of is like, when you look back on AC/DC's career, like, that's the legacy. It's not so much about, like, you know, interpersonal relationships and lineup changes. They're not
or
necessarily...
even the lyrics.
Yeah, they're right. Yeah. They're not known for depth of lyric, let's say, or sort of... any boundary pushing studio decisions or techniques, but it is just this like pure distillation of what hard rock can and maybe should always sound like. And
I think
so fun.
A lot of studios use this to test their sound systems. This is like the rock and roll sound, which is crazy.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but I guess it's not so crazy really at all. I take it back. I would love for you to tell me a little bit more about AC/DC.
They were founded in 1973 in Sydney, Australia.
Down under.
Primarily, down
I'm not
under.
Gonna do that
primarily
again.
by brothers Angus and Malcolm Young on lead and rhythm guitar, respectively. And in their first few years, they were a band for about 2 years before they actually put out their first record. Okay. They had some lineup changes through those early years, which for their debut album solidified with the Youngs on lead and rhythm guitar, Bob Bailey on bass guitar, and Peter Clack on drums, and their first of a few vocalists, Bon Scott.
Bonnie Boy. Maybe no one has ever called him that, but that's
I'm
fine.
not sure. Maybe his mother. Bon Scott on vocals really defined
the sound.
the sound of their early records. I think even thematically, as he was their lyricist and sort of brought a lot of the imagery and themes that we continue to associate with AC/DC.
My favorite songs were written by him. Yeah.
And he just had a really distinct sort of low, gruff voice. He unfortunately passed away.
I mean, I think that's the perfect place to start getting into the album.
Right. So Back in Black comes on the heels of Bon Scott's death in, I think, February of 1980. He died of alcohol poisoning, although I think, Julie, you want to share.
I have a couple different ways to say it. I read in an article that authorities ruled this death by misadventure. And frankly, if I go out, I would like it to be that.
It's tragic, and who knows what AC/DC would be become with him still at the helm. But it gives them, I don't know, maybe opportunity is the wrong word, but it forces the band to, first of all, decide if they're going to stay together, which they do. They recruit a new singer in Brian Johnson.
I love that.
And, within a year of Bon Scott's death, they cut Back in Black at a janky little studio in the Bahamas.
Really 1 year after Highway to Hell. I mean, it was a fast turnaround for any band, let alone a band who lost their lead singer. I mean, to be able to come back from that and then make a best-selling album, I think is frankly incredible. And I don't know whether to credit that to Brian or to Angus and Malcolm. I don't know where the credit should fall, but it is interesting.
I mean, there is something... you can maybe speculate what it would be like to have Bon Scott singing on the Back in Black songs, but there is something about Brian Johnson's voice, which is a little bit more high-pitched, a little bit more shrill,
a lot
maybe.
Of people didn't like
a little bit more shrill and shrieky.
At first.
And it's abrasive in a way that where Bon Scott's voice was maybe a little bit warmer, as warm and welcoming as, hard rock music can be.
Right.
But it fits the songs. Like it fits the intensity of the playing, the crackle of the riffs and the guitars. Like it's just a really well mixed album.
I would love to say a couple things about Brian. I just think he's so cute. I watched a bunch of interviews with him.
I know you do.
He's so sweet. And I just find his story interesting. He was actually the lead singer of a different band in the north of England. And AC/DC's, they had seen him play. And Bon Scott had said that he liked Brian Johnson's vibe, his voice. So he was someone that they had heard of and already sort of in a way had the seal of approval from Bon, which I think is interesting. Why are you smiling?
No, it's just a heartwarming story. It's great.
It is.
I mean, as much as, it's also tragic.
Yeah. But I think it's nice that sort of all ties back in. They were holding auditions. They call him up and ask him to audition, and he tells the story about how someone calls him and says, "We want you to come to London." He's like, "Oh, I don't want to go to London." And they were like, "Well, it's a big opportunity." And he's like, "Well, who's it for?" And they were like, "Can't say." And he was like, "Okay, I need a hint or I'm not coming." And she was like, "Okay, I'll spell it for you." And she was like, AC/DC. And he was like, AC/DC. And she's like, "Oh my God, I've said too much." But obviously, like, he goes. But he said, "I'm only going to go to London if I have like more than one thing going on." So he also records a jingle for a vacuum cleaner while he's in London to audition for AC/DC.
Everyone's got to eat. I respect that. If the audition doesn't work out, at least you've got some vacuum cash flow. So one other figure I think it's worth mentioning when we're just sort of setting the scene for this album is the album's producer, Robert John, nicknamed Mutt Lange.
Mutt Lange, yeah.
Who is, I think, credited with honing AC/DC's sound into something that was a little bit more mainstream friendly while still holding on to its raw, abrasive rock sound. He had worked with them first on Highway to Hell, the previous album. So I'm sure at least with, the returning members for Back in Black, they had some rapport and some chemistry. And I think the alchemy of him behind, in the booth with a new fresh blood in front of the mic really gives this album that electricity that runs through it.
But I think some of the electricity comes from the stage of the Bahamas. There's not so much to say, but it is funny.
It was kind of a last resort. They were looking for studios in the UK to record at for both scheduling and budgetary reasons,
Right.
they had to
Go to
outsource to the
Bahamas.
Bahamas. They were waylaid by tropical storms, which
Yeah.
kept cutting power in and out of the studio.
Mhm.
It was not the most comfortable setup.
No. I read that the woman who ran the studio gave them all fishing spears because she said, you know what, it's kind of a dangerous neighborhood and you guys might need to protect yourselves. And they all were sleeping with like these 6-foot fishing spears like next to their doors.
I think maybe you can hear a little bit of that them on edge
Yeah, the
in
tension.
these songs. Yeah.
Maybe.
So Julia, why don't we get into some of the themes of this album and use that as a starting point to talk about the songs, dive into the music a little bit more. The lyrics, yeah. So
Please go ahead.
the key theme of AC/DC's Back in Black is rock and roll, baby.
Oh my God,
Like,
I'm shocked.
I don't know how else for an album that is like lyrically, musically, thematically, just about rock and roll and the lifestyle of living fast, loving hard, hell,
Yes, important.
the devil, and general debauchery. I mean,
You phrased this better than they could on any of their songs, but yes, I would say that is what they were going for.
yeah.
I think it's slightly ironic that this album is about rock and roll, and it's also in many ways, and we can touch on this, an homage to Bon Scott. But rock and roll to me is what killed Bon Scott, and then to make an album celebrating rock and roll and excess and partying, and I don't know, it's not funny, but it is something I thought about. Maybe he'd want to live on, with that attitude. I don't know.
You have to think that he would have endorsed the message of this album as someone who lived the life of a rock star.
Yeah, and I have some controversy to touch on, but I think we can get to that in time, and let's go through
I'm
the
curious to
themes
hear
first. Yes.
What you're going to dig up.
Rock and roll, couldn't agree more. It wouldn't be very rock and roll of them to change their tune. So I think to go from Highway to Hell into one of the greatest best-selling rock albums of all time just totally makes sense.
Yeah. Along with that rock star lifestyle that this album exalts is sex. I mean, the lyrics of this album have some of the most ridiculous, pure double entendres that you could dream up.
And some of it's not even double entendre. It's just like
straight
we're having
up
sex. Yes,
yeah, it's
that's
straight
what
up
we're doing.
allusions to the act of sex.
Yes.
And they were probably fucking. They were I don't want to sorry for any young listeners, but they were rock stars and they were young and hip, and I don't know, maybe they had families by then. I'm not sure. But
I think some of them might have been married, but it doesn't matter. They were whatever led them to write this music. Look, to be honest, some of the songs I had never listened to that closely, and I texted you this the other day that for the first time I read through the lyrics of Giving the Dog a Bone, and I literally was laughing out loud because I just had no idea what I was singing. And then I showed it to my roommate, and I just, no context, was like, hey, read the lyrics to this song. And she screamed. I could hear her from the other room.
Should I read out some of these lyrics?
Please.
Verse 1.
Okay.
She'd take you down easy, going down to her knees, going down to the devil, down to 90 degrees.
Yeah.
She's blowing me crazy till my ammunition is dry. She's using her head again. She's using her head again. She's using her head again. I'm just giving the dog a bone.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Question. Is she the dog and he's giving her the bone, or is he the dog and he's receiving the bone? Do you know what I mean?
I think she's the dog.
So that's not so great for me.
No,
but
the devil gets roped in there.
Of course.
Arguable feminist anthem. She's using her head again. Women have thoughts too, and they deserve
to think them.
Yeah, no, I don't. I have a feeling that's not what he was talking
I think
about.
the feminists would come for you. However, that's a funnier one. Some of the other lyrics about sex, I'm fuzzier on. I actually, as one of my themes, had sexism and misogyny, and this song to me is more comical. But I think in some of the songs, there's like a misogynistic and almost like violent undertone. And again, what the first, I don't know, 30 years of my life listening to this album, didn't think about that. But only paying really close attention for the sake of like coming up with themes to the album did I really realize that like they're portraying women primarily through their relationships. And like, okay, you're an all-male rock band, so that's totally fair. But a lot of it's like transactional exchanges or like criticizing women. The consent thing is really fuzzy. I don't know.
Or just straight up objectification.
Yes,
she was
also
a fast machine. She kept her motor clean.
Yeah, but you know what? That one's funnier to me, but also not great. But also,
it is a clever little
it's clever. You know what?
Metaphor.
Brian Johnson said that was the first lyric that he wrote for them.
Wow.
Was that. So what a way to enter the band with that anthem. One of their most famous songs.
Yeah. I mean, this album is like top to bottom iconic tracks.
But at the time, they weren't talking about anything that other rock bands weren't talking about. And I'm not like judging them for that.
You almost get the sense of they have these, you know, thunderous riffs and they're ready to like crank out an album and they're like, great, now we need some words. Let's just like jot down some classic rock cliches and fill the space so that we can like shriek them out. And
I think a lot of them are throwaway lines.
Yeah.
I just think that almost in some ways makes it worse. Like I have a quote.
True, maybe. Yeah, be real misogynist. You know, don't do it half-heartedly.
Double down. Yeah. No, Angus and Malcolm, the brothers, had said that they are kind of pranksters. They were lighthearted about the music they were writing. Like they weren't taking themselves seriously as lyricists. And I think Malcolm said, you know, we're not a macho band. We take the music far more seriously than we take the lyrics. A lot of them are just throwaway lines.
While this album was pretty beloved in its day, you're not. There were some critics who I think held a similar opinion.
No, I don't think any of my thoughts are original. Yeah. I'm sure many women have listened to this and thought, huh.
Well, okay. I was just gonna read some of the thoughts from a critic named Red Star. He found the songs indistinguishable from one another, marred by hyper-masculine fantasies, rock music stock phrases, garish guitar, and dull rhythms. I don't fully agree.
I don't agree.
As much as like I see the argument for the certain homogeneousness of the songs and the sound, but you could also, on the flip side, chalk that up to just like tight, cohesive production and songwriting.
Yeah.
And
you could go either way, honestly.
You know, if you're going to ding this album on anything, it should be, like you're saying, those poorly aged themes of misogyny. And he's not wrong. Like it is full of hypermasculine fantasies, which certainly in that day were
not abnormal,
the jet fuel of rock and roll. Yeah.
I mean, I would say my main criticism for the album is that oftentimes I wouldn't notice a song had changed into a different song, and like the music had a tight theme to it that, you know, sort of transcends the whole album, but it does in some cases make songs indistinguishable from one another. Not all of them, but a couple times I'd be like, oh, 3 songs have passed and I thought I was listening to the same song.
Totally. Yeah.
And you know, it's a little boring, but not that many people, I think, were listening to this album over and over and over and over again, like me, to prepare for this podcast. So
maybe they were. It was a big seller.
You know what? You're right.
It rocks.
It rocks.
Julia, what else was on the radio in 1980?
So in 1980, or in 81, the Grammy for Record of the Year and Album of the Year went to Christopher Cross. Gonna be really honest, I have no idea who that is, and I listened to it, still didn't recognize him.
I've never heard that name before in my life.
Never heard of him. The Grammy winner.
Wow.
And it was like best single, best album, record of the year. No idea. Who is Christopher Cross?
I'm not sure. Maybe someday we'll get to him on the podcast. I don't think we should prioritize it though. So the album that won Album of the Year when Back in Black was released in 1980 was Billy Joel's 52nd Street. Which is, you know, a name we recognize, unlike Criss Cross.
Who the hell?
And captures a totally different sound of the time.
Yeah. Was that late
much
70s,
more,
early 80s?
Yeah, polished singer-songwriter pop.
Yeah.
Piano forward, instrumentals and melodies.
They're not in competing genres, though. And you know what? I think at this time, AC/DC really opens the door for like heavier rock. You know, like Metallica really rises to popularity after this time, and a lot of the other like more punky metal rock bands are really like finding their stride after this album is released. And I think some of the inspiration came from Back in Black.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I mean, some other albums that came out that year, Iron Maiden put out their self-titled debut.
So it's the debut of Iron Maiden. Okay, so Iron Maiden are kicking it off in this year.
And, maybe riding on some of that Back in Black momentum in terms of like rock in the mainstream.
It's a great time for rock music.
Talking Heads put out Remain in Light, which is an amazing album, which Fish covered in its entirety. One Halloween, I can't remember what year. Diana Ross's Diana, that's a perfect disco album.
Yeah.
The Clash's London Calling, one of the most iconic albums of all time. So Back in Black came out against the backdrop of some incredible albums. Rolling Stone put out a list of the best albums of 1980. Back in Black is number 4 out of 80. So they real recognize real. And in that article, they called it arguably the greatest year for great albums ever.
Wow.
I don't know if it's a bold claim.
Well, yeah. I mean, Sabrina Carpenter wasn't alive yet. So.
Okay. We know how you feel about Sabrina Carpenter. But look, we got Prince putting out albums. We got Bruce Springsteen putting out a classic, In the River. I mean, it was a really ripe time for music. Right. And I think AC/DC stands out from the mainstream in many ways because it's this outsider heavy metal band from Australia, and this was maybe a turning point for bringing like hard rock with a pop friendly edge, catchy riffs, catchy hooks. It floated above some pretty hefty competition, so mad respect.
Something that's interesting about tying into what you're saying, so after Back in Black was released, AC/DC's previous records, Highway to Hell, If You Want Blood, You've Got It, and Let There Be Rock, all re-enter the British charts. And they had been popular, but this was really, like Highway to Hell, I think was the first one that really found like wide critical reception. And then Back in Black comes out. And so this made them the first band since the Beatles to have 4 albums in the British Top 100 simultaneously, which is pretty crazy.
That is pretty remarkable. Yeah. You could consider that part of the legacy of this album is that because it was so massive, it not only changed the future trajectory of rock and roll and of AC/DC as a band specifically, but it changed people's relationship to their previous work. And that's to make an album that looks both forwards and backwards like that is, especially when at its core it's just simple rock and roll, no frills,
not
lean and mean.
But
like,
no,
you gotta
absolutely.
respect.
And I'm not sure if we've mentioned this, but this album is the second best-selling album of all time,
behind Thriller,
behind Michael Jackson's Thriller.
That's wild.
It is, and it's almost unbelievable, but it's true. This is 27 times platinum in America. I
had this a CD of this album that I wore out in high school.
You're like, it skips.
Yeah, it does. It's scratched up.
Rotates.
I didn't treat it well. No, but when I was like a freshman in high school, like new guitar playing rock and roll head, I would just spend like hours in my room playing along with this, among other great rock albums. But it was certainly formative for me. And like you, I did not read into any of those lyrics until this week.
And I think that's okay because I don't think that's what they wrote it for.
No, it's for the best.
And also it's really about the music and the rock and roll vibe, and that's okay.
One other little ranking that's worth noting, I think, is that Rolling Stone put it at number 84 of their top 500 albums of all time, which is a solid showing.
Yeah.
Really solid showing.
For this type of music.
For sure.
With almost no depth at all. But with some of the most famous guitar riffs of all time. It's like you kind of have to balance that and understand what are people listening for. And even if the lyrics are completely nonsensical in some songs or like very outdated, the music itself is not only timeless, but just will remain probably for the next century some of the most famous music to have ever been written.
Yeah, and it's fun, it's accessible. I mean, it's simple. These are,
Yes.
3, 4, 5 chord songs
Yeah.
at most. There are no frills, and that's part of the appeal. Like they knew how to write good music, good riffs that would just like really become earworms.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you need to like rock music to hear an AC/DC song come on and get a little into it.
Yeah, it's much less abrasive or transgressive than certainly some of the further reaches of heavy metal,
like
hard
Metallica.
rock.
I mean, they're actually pretty mainstream, but still, for some people, that would be a step too far.
Yeah.
And I think this sits comfortably in the middle.
Totally.
Do you want to talk about some of the tracks? You want to get into your favorite track, least favorite track?
Yeah, my favorite track is "Shoot to Thrill."
Okay. Okay.
I just think it's so catchy. I love the rhythms. The lyrics, like all of these songs, are kind of like goofy sexual rock and roll, but they're fun, and I love singing along to that chorus.
Yeah.
And I think like, it's the second track on the album. The album opens with Hell's Bells, which begins with this iconic tolling of
funereal sound.
Let's call it a funeral bell. I mean, it feels like they're,
I mean, in a sense,
saying goodbye to Bon Scott, and it's a great song. It's a little bit slow. It's I think the slowest one on the album, and it.
I didn't think about it that way, but I think you're
has
right.
a bit more of like a somber.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a
darkness.
minute of bell tolling.
Yeah.
So, but it flawlessly, transitions into Shoot to Thrill.
Right, and there's the crackle of that opening riff of Shoot to Thrill after that sort of like curtain closing on the past chapter that Hell's Bells serves. There's just, it feels like they just rev the engine and come right out of the gate, and I love that. Honorable mentions though from me, Black to Black.
Okay.
That's one of the first riffs I learned on when I got an electric guitar. And You Shook Me All Night Long, which has those sort of, I don't know, big echoey chorus.
Absolutely.
Is super catchy and iconic. What about you, Julia? What songs on this album do you love?
I love. It's funny because they all really are pretty similar. And I was pretty divided on the album with this new 21st century listen. But I think Hell's Bells I've always really liked. I love the music. The pacing doesn't bother me that it's a bit slower. I do really like it. I think it's a wonderful opener to an album. And I think for me, an honorable mention would be You Shook Me All Night Long. Although I do think it's an outlier to this album. If I had to pick a song that doesn't belong on this album, it's that one. It doesn't have this, what?
Say more. No, I'm curious.
I think it stylistically fits in, but like the music is different, the pacing is different, it's more clever. I don't know, it sounds different to me. The songs that sort of play into one another, this one doesn't fit for me in the same way.
Yeah, it has a bit more of like a pop sound to it. Like it could be like a Rod Stewart ballad if it was a little bit less crunchy or something. I don't know. Yeah, I get you. What about your least favorite song? Do you have any that you...
If I had to kill off a song, I don't like What Do You Do for Money, Honey. I read the Rolling Stone review, or one of the Rolling Stone critics said that he thought this song was just mean-spirited sexism. And I was thinking to myself when I read it, I didn't have the music playing. I thought, well, maybe there's no... meaning behind it. And then I put the song on and you can almost hear like disdain in his voice. And I was ready to like defend him. And then I listened to it and I was like, oh, he says bitch with such like callousness that I was like, it sounds like he had someone in mind. I don't know. I didn't like that. And there were a couple others like Let Me Put My Love Into You, where I think the lyrics are pretty problematic.
I think that's so fair, actually. I'm not going to argue with you on any of that. What Do You Do for Money, Honey is another one that I don't really love as much musically as for its
weaker all around.
Yeah, it's weaker all around. Similar with Have a Drink on Me. I just don't find it has the same sort of like catchy electricity as the best songs on this album.
Yeah. What was your least favorite?
Those two. Have a Drink on Me.
Oh,
What Do
okay.
You Do for Money, Honey?
Interestingly, my favorite lyrics, though, or the lyrics I find most enjoyable, are from Have a Drink on Me. Join me for a drink, boys. We're going to make big noise. Don't worry about tomorrow. Take it today. Forget about the check. We'll get hell to pay.
Because they're friends and you like that.
Yeah.
It's just drinking with your boys.
It's fun and relatable.
How harmless.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's like a little softer, but I just found this, like, when I looked at the lyrics, I'm like, this was fun and catchy. Cute little rhymes. Like, it just, I don't know. I think it's like a trope to be like, you shook me all night long is genius, you know?
It's not genius.
For sure. But
there's brilliance in the simplicity. Like, can I read you the first verse of Back in Black?
You may, and thank you for asking.
Back in black, I hit the sack. I've been too long, I'm glad to be back. Yes, I'm let loose from the noose that's kept me hanging about. Kept me hanging around. I'm just looking at the sky because it's getting me high. Forget the hearse because I'll never die. I got 9 lives, cat's eyes, abusing every one of them and running wild. What? Like, it means nothing, but it also
it's great.
Is perfect. Like, that's what that song is about. You hear that riff and you're like, yeah, of course, I'm back in black. I hit the sack. Like,
yes.
It's not trying to be something it's not.
That one's directly a tribute to Bon Scott. And I think, the motifs of death, like, they purposefully were like, it can't be morbid, so let's make it almost funny, and we're taunting death, and I like that.
Yeah, hell is the goal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They were on a highway to hell before, and what do you know? Brother Bon made it.
Right.
I know this is not what this album is about, but there's something to be said for how great these songs are when they like pop on a shuffled playlist or like at a bar or something, like, as opposed to listening to this album all the way through, where you can get bogged down by maybe some of the similarity of the songs, or if you're listening to it all the way through or over and over again, like we did in preparation for this, you're starting to confront some of the lyrics, whatever. It's almost better serves like a rock radio setting where maybe like one of these songs come on and you're like, hell yeah, I'm going to headbang for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Or whatever,
totally.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. That's a lot of stamina, the 20-minute headbang.
20-minute headbang. Yeah, well, you don't go to enough Fish shows.
So true. And you are correct. And will I change? Hard to say. But I would go to one to test it out.
Would you play this album on a road trip? Could you road trip to this album?
I think 1,000%.
Yeah, there's.
But would I get bored by the end? Well, look, it's not that long of an album, but I do wonder if by the end I'd be like, okay, because they do start to sound the same.
Yeah, but like you said, it's a pretty short album. Like, a single listen through on a road trip, I think would really set the mood. Maybe like you just get out of the urban areas, you turn onto the highway. Finally, you run this. It just build up speed, and it sets the tone for a great road trip.
For me, this is a perfect gym album. You get to the gym, you get pumped up with adrenaline. I was like, I could lift a car. Like, I was so hyped up listening to this. And to prep for this, that was the first time I played it. I was at the gym. I'm like, oh shoot, I should be listening to Back in Black. So I put it on and I was like, fuck yeah, this is great. The energy is great. And then I sort of zoned out. And so by the time the album ended, I'm like, oh, it's over. But I'd kind of stopped paying attention.
I had a 1-for-1 experience listening to this album at the gym.
You're like, retweet, have nothing to add.
Yep.
One of my categories is, can you play any of these songs at a funeral?
I guess it depends whose funeral, Isn't that always the case, though? Like,
I suppose it's a personality thing.
You'd play Hell's Bells at Bon Scott's funeral, right?
I would love for Hell's Bells to play at my funeral. When I die by misadventure at age 95, please play Hell's Bells. That's what I want.
You heard it here, folks. Yeah. Julia's lawyer, if you're listening. Legally binding.
Yeah. Exactly. What is this album as a beverage for you?
Aussie moonshine.
What? Oh, okay.
Some
moonshine from
some
Australia.
Outback moonshine.
Okay.
Or just like a cheap, cheeky pint.
Yeah.
I really like, you don't overcomplicate what you're drinking to this album.
Yeah. I was thinking like a really simple like Jack Daniels or Johnny Walker with a splash of Coke.
Totally.
Yeah. I've never had Australian moonshine, so it
To be honest, I haven't either.
It didn't come to mind for me. Okay. What's your yes? Oh, you looked like you had something to say. Please.
I feel like I was maybe going to say what you were about to say.
Oh.
Should we say it on 3?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
What's your
karaoke
rating?
song? Oh.
I forgot about that category.
Yeah. What song would you whip out from Back in Black at karaoke?
Probably You Shook Me All Night Long or Back in Black.
Back in Black has got to be the answer to me.
Oh, okay.
I think I've
was
already
wrong.
done
Sorry,
Back in
guys.
Black at
Have you?
karaoke. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And you just kind of scream along and
Yeah, maybe You Shook Me All Night. I mean, maybe that's like a little overtly sexual. I guess no one cares. But
no
I
one
think
cares.
Back in Black, that's iconic.
It's iconic, yeah.
And people will know it. But same with You Shook Me All Night Long. You can't go wrong with either, I think.
Yeah.
You can belt out both.
I agree. Okay, now you can ask what you were going to ask before.
Isaac, what is your rating for this album?
I got to give this a solid 8 out of 10. And
Okay.
it's a little high. I think maybe on a bad day, it's a 7, 7.5. Especially, you know, when you peel back the layers a little bit.
Yeah,
look
no
at
one's
how
doing that,
poorly
except
some
for
of it's
us,
aged.
apparently.
But
Yeah.
just in terms of pure listening enjoyment, legacy, you know, impact it had on me, certainly when I was younger and getting into guitar and rock and roll in general, like it holds up. It's still fun. The riffs are iconic. The influence is still relevant. And
Right.
I think it deserves its 8 out of 10.
I think Pitchfork gave it an 8.8. And I remember thinking, that's
They're notorious sticklers.
yeah, so that's why I thought it was interesting. I mean, look, you know, facts are facts. This is the second top selling album of all time.
Yeah.
So clearly that means something.
Yeah.
Lyrically, yes.
Well, so what's your rating?
Oh.
Don't stop talking in circles. I don't want to hear about Pitchfork. I want to hear about Julia.
Lyrically, I'm giving this a 4.5. Musically, I'm giving it a 7.5 or an 8. This was hard for me because I was trying to look at it holistically and couldn't.
I think that's a really fair assessment of this album. And
Thanks, Isaac.
though you earlier in our conversation you mentioned some controversy around this album that I don't know and have not in the interim looked up, and I'm dying to know what juicy gossip you're about to spill.
Right. Okay. So again, this is just based on some research I've done, and I will say that this is an enduring topic of debate. So there's no conclusion. We'll never know. So there have been some discrepancies in interviews over who wrote the music for this album and the lyrics. So Angus and Malcolm were writing the music, and Bon Scott had been the main, as you mentioned, had been the main lyricist for AC/DC. So he dies, and kind of like a few months later, they have completed this album. And, you know, maybe even like 5 months later. And this was released as a tribute to him, and people were asking, well, you know, he doesn't appear in the credits at all. Like, he's not mentioned once. Like, his name doesn't appear. He has 0 writing credits. And everyone's like, well, he had written a bunch of music. And what happened to that music? And Brian Johnson said, oh, well, this is all me. I wrote all of these. And then in other interviews, Angus and Malcolm were like, oh, well, maybe Bon wrote some stuff, and then we wanted to complete it for him. Oh, but that's not on this album. And then later they're like, no, we never used any of his stuff ever again. And, you know, everyone over the years kind of gives different answers. And it's one of those things where we won't ever know. But sometimes people who are like real experts will listen to some of the songs and think, oh, that's a Bon line. But he gets no writing credits and no residuals for any of these albums. It's, you know, who's to say?
I guess we'll never know.
We can't. There's no way to know.
But, you know, a little mystique
Yeah.
is good.
So
for music like this.
And I don't want to end on like a morbid note, but Bon Scott's girlfriend at the time said that he had called her maybe like the day before his death, saying he completed the album that AC/DC was working on. He'd finished the lyrics. He was so excited, and he wanted to go out and celebrate. He had a few days of partying, and that's, of course, when he meets his end. But she ties those things together and says, like, okay, he finished the album, goes out to celebrate, dies from alcohol poisoning. AC/DC months later puts out the greatest selling album of all time, or second, but you know.
Well, that's a shame. I mean, I'd like to believe that they did right by their former bandmate and his legacy, and you know, his, regardless of royalties and writing credits, I would say that Bon Scott's legacy has aged very well.
Oh yeah, he's fine, but it's just interesting.
As has the legacy of this album, and you know,
absolutely,
it made them wealthy men.
Indeed. And that's okay. And I have a quote to end with. In 1980, David Frick reviews the album and he says, "This is not only the best of AC/DC's albums." What? Did you write it down also? Love it. Okay. "But this is the apex of heavy metal art. The first LP since Led Zeppelin II that captures all the blood, sweat, and arrogance of the genre." And I feel like that's a theme in itself. Blood, sweat, arrogance, rock and roll. That's what we're talking about.
Drop the mic, Julia. Let's call it there.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks for listening, guys.
No final notes from you?
No, I've keep it simple, stupid. Thanks for tuning in to For the Record.
You can find us on Instagram at @for_the_record_podcast.
Our Instagram also has a link where you can submit any albums you'd like to hear us cover in the future.
We can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we'll take everything into consideration.
You can also shoot us an email at 4 as in the number, D as in the letter, recordpodcast@gmail.com. That's 4D recordpodcast@gmail.com.
And give us a follow and a 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. And remember to tune in next week for a brand new episode.
We'll see you there.